DreAllDay.com.
You are now tuned into the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you've expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative, which is the go-getter energy that moves any one of us, including yourself, to go and make things happen instead of wait for things to happen. And then we put all this together into one bundle, one package, one mindset, one method, one philosophy, one book, one show. This daily masterclass that is called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. And today's topic is how to remain a beginner. And when I say a beginner, I mean a beginner in mind, a beginner in just the way that you approach things, and that you are remaining open-minded and understanding that you don't know everything. Now, before I get into explaining why we're talking about this particular topic, I want to tell you that I have a text line where I want you to send me a text message at any time during this episode or any time after. You can't text it before, so the time's already gone, but anytime now or after. And let me know the most valuable insight you've gotten from this episode or from any other episode of this show, or you can ask me a question, you can share a challenge, offer an insight from anything that you got from, whether it's something that you heard on this show or on YouTube or an article of mine that you read, or you can just get on my text list. You can get my daily motivation text that I send out every morning. My number is 305-384-6894. Again, 305-384-6894. Now, I thought of this particular topic, how to remain a beginner. I was reading this article from, it might have been just an email that got sent out by Tim Ferriss, the author of the 4-Hour Books series. And he had posted a excerpt from a book written by this guy named George Leonard. He wrote a book called Mastery. Now, Robert Greene has a book called Mastery as well. There's a different author, different book, also titled Mastery. And George Leonard talked about how babies learn to talk and walk by being encouraged to make the smallest progress, though they are still far from correct. All right, a baby learning how to walk, and any of you who has raised a child or been around a young child trying to learn how to even stand up and walk, they try over and over and over again and don't get it right until they try to who knows how many times. Who knows? I don't know if anyone's ever actually counted how many times a baby tries to stand before they can stand up without falling down, or tries to walk before they can actually do it. Now, as adults, what happens is, as we get older, even before we become adults, we begin to lose this willingness to keep trying something that is clearly not working, quote unquote, correctly yet. And then as we stop trying, then we stop learning, because we are striving to be correct all the time. And going to school actually, in many ways, does not help this situation. It actually speeds up this very process of us stop trying to, or stop being willing to be learners, because we see other people who are getting things, quote unquote, right. And if we're not getting things right, then we don't want to deal with the embarrassment of being the only one, or one of a few who are in this category of wrong. Therefore, we only do things that we know we can do correctly. And what happens then is we narrow ourselves to this narrow scope of things that we're willing to do or willing to try, because those are the only things that we know we can do right. We don't want to do anything that would be labeled wrong, because listen, when you go to school, you do something that's wrong, you fail. Right? You get held back, or they write a note to your parents and let them know that you're not doing so well, or you get you get a letter from the administration that says, hey, you're in a danger zone right now because you're not getting enough things right. So this need to be correct and this unwillingness to be wrong, this unwillingness to fail, is something that actually holds a lot of us back, and it takes us out of this beginner mindset. But hopefully you can survive the American educational system. I don't know how it is in other countries. You can survive this educational system and still have at least some fragments of your willingness to be a beginner still in your life. Or even if you did not, hopefully the intention for today's episode is to re-spark that in your mind and remove the irrational fear that you may have of being a beginner, of being wrong, of failing, of coming up short, of not being perfectly correct, and the value and benefit that you can get from this mentality. That's what I'm going to put you onto in today's masterclass. So we all clear on where we're headed here today? Good. Point number one. The topic, once again, is how to remain a beginner. Number one, be willing to be wrong, be willing to be imperfect, and be willing to be a work in progress. Now, these sound, to some of you rather, let me just say that to some people listening to me right now, this sounds pretty simple. This sounds like something that you are already doing. You're willing to try something that doesn't work. You're willing to put something out there that's not exactly 100% sharp corners on everything, and everything is exactly where it needs to be. And you're willing to admit to yourself and even to the world and let it be obvious to the world that you're still working on yourself and you're not quite exactly where you need to be yet, but you're working on it. You're just going to keep working. New inventions and new innovations, understand, these things only come from people who are willing to be wrong for long enough to bring about something that is new. If you really think about that, you think of something like the smartphone, which is not even 20 years old. We are only able to have the smartphone because there were people who were willing to be wrong for long enough to make that thing become reality, meaning they were trying, who knows how many years it took for the smartphone to go from idea to us actually having something that Steve Jobs could hold in his hand at that Apple announcement conference and say a phone, a computer, and an MP3 player all in one device. And that video, you can find it online. It's almost like a legendary video where Steve Jobs is introducing the iPhone, and people are like, oh my God, all three things in one, and no one had ever considered this concept. Well, he had, and then he brought it to life, but how many years was he working on it? The actual glass, if you look at your smartphone right now, and you run your fingers on the screen, that glass that it took years for Steve Jobs, first he had the idea, and then he assigned his team, his design team. If you read the book Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson, which I've mentioned that book at least 10 times here on the show before. So if you haven't obtained or read that book yet, then I suggest you get on that because you're behind schedule. But he had this idea of how can we create a device, because it went from the big computers that used to be the size of somebody's living room. I didn't see those computers. Then we had the big boxy computers that we used to have in school. Those of you who are my age, if you're over the age of 35, you remember those computers back in the elementary school and middle school days. Then we got the a little bit lighter computers. And then we got the more flat screen. Nowadays you got people with 2 monitors. Then you got the laptop computers. And then we got the tablets. No, the tablets actually came after the smartphone. But then Steve Jobs had this idea, well, these computers keep getting smaller. How about we put a computer in the palm of somebody's hand? Now, technically, this was already done with the MP3 player. The MP3 player is a computer, but he wanted something that could take the MP3 player and combine like web browsing and the phone option, and that became the smartphone. But the idea for the smartphone was being talked about in Apple headquarters way before we actually had a smartphone, the actual device. And one of the biggest things that Steve Jobs had his tech team figure out was we need the kind of glass that people can run their fingers over and over and over again, and it's transparent enough, this glass, that you can tap it and the glass, it gets through, that the phone knows that somebody has tapped on it and it should do something. But at the same time, the glass needs to be strong enough that if someone drops their phone, maybe not too hard, but drops their phone or mashes their fingers on the screen, that they're not actually going to break the glass. So this glass had to kind of be strong enough to bend but not break, metaphorically speaking. And that's the glass that is the screen of your smartphone right now. And that was just one of the many technical specifications that Steve Jobs had for the smartphone when he was first creating it. Now, depending on what smartphone that you have now, I know some people have some older versions of the smartphone, but the current versions of the phone now have no buttons whatsoever, at least on the front of it. Now, you still got the buttons on the side, but I'm pretty sure those will be going away pretty soon too. But you remember the original smartphones used to have a button, the home button there in the middle. Now they don't have that anymore. It's just all glass. The entire thing is all glass. That was an idea that Steve Jobs had from the beginning. We want to remove that button and not have that button at all. But the first versions of the phone, they weren't able to do it. But he said later versions, we are going to do this. He saw this stuff way ahead of time. And Steve Jobs has been dead for 10 years. This is kind of visions that he had up front, but he was willing to be quote unquote wrong in that we're going to put all these things together into one device, and nobody else even had this idea. It didn't exist. It's not like it was selling. It's not like the whole world was like, okay, Steve, as soon as you do that, we'll buy it. People had to see it, and he had to bet on the fact that people would be willing to invest in it and want it once he put it out. But there was no way he knew that. I don't know how much market research you could even do for something like that, because it's not like people were asking for it. So this is part of a person, I think Steve Jobs is someone that we can all credit as being an innovator. We can credit him as being an inventor, He was a visionary who saw this way before anybody else saw it. And when you're innovating and creating something that is brand new, you're bringing something to market that no one has ever seen before, you can't even go to them and say, well, what would you think about something like this? Because it would confuse most people. And I don't think he did that. Steve Jobs is famous for saying the customer is stupid. You can't ask them what they want. You don't want to do market research for what people want, because all they're going to do is ask for a better version of what already exists. And he's the kind of guy who wanted to create something that did not already exist. So he went against the grain with this. So he's like, okay, I'm going to be wrong for however many years it took him from concept to actual product of the smartphone. And now none of us can live without it. Thomas Edison, 10,000 experiments, as they famously say. He went through 10,000 different tries to create the incandescent light bulb. Now, who knows if it was actually 10,000, but the point is, he kept trying to create this thing. He would try this, he would try that, that didn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't work. And according to legend, every time he tried some new combination and it didn't work, he would just take a note of what combination he tried or what he did slightly differently on this experiment that he hadn't done in the previous experiments, and he would just note what the result was, and or whatever ideas, whatever insights he could come up with as to why the result was the result. Now, who knows how fast he was going through each iteration, but I would say 10,000 experiments is a long time to be wrong about one thing. And many people, it's just like, again, you think of the concept of the baby trying to learn how to stand up or the baby learning how to walk. Many people quit before they get anywhere close to 10,000 times of being wrong before they get to the point of being right. So this whole concept of what we're talking about here today, again, the topic today is how to remain a beginner in your mind. You got to be willing to be wrong. You got to be willing to try to stand up and fall down. Be willing to see other people who are succeeding in their way, while you continue to try and not yet succeed, at least not by traditional standards in your way, but keep trying anyway. Keep going anyway. Many people have that beaten out of them, either by your parents, by your teachers, or just by society in general, or by yourself, by your own mind, and you stop wanting to try. You stop wanting to be that person who is losing or failing or not winning. So today, again, I'm pointing these things out to you so that you can realize that it's okay to be that person who is still in that beginner stage, at least in a certain aspect of your life. Point number 2. Today's topic, once again, is how to remain a beginner. When you do and try things that are new to you, remember that you're usually not going to be great at them at the beginning, because you're a beginner. You're brand new at it. It's the first time doing it. Therefore, you should expect to suck at that thing. And if you are instantly good at something that you've never done before, you should consider yourself lucky. Now, I think everyone pretty much understands that. And when you start something new, you're probably not going to be great at it at the beginning. It takes a little bit of time, it takes a little bit of work. You got to work on your game and get good at doing that thing. So now, since we all understand that, here's the question I'm going to ask you. How many new things have you tried in the last month? How many times have you tried something new in the last year? How often in the last 12 months, let's just say, have you purposely placed yourself in the position of being a beginner? How many times have you put yourself and said, no, I'm going to do this thing. I haven't done this before, or maybe I have, but I'm not really that good at it. I'm definitely not as good as these other people that I see at doing this thing, but I'm going to put myself out there anyway, doing this thing that I know I'm not good at, that I know I'm not going to be great at, that I know I'm going to fail at, that I know I'm going to have some growing pains in, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to jump all in on this thing and deal with the growing pains as I go along. How often do you place yourself in that position? This is just a question that I want to throw out there for you to really think about. Because here's what happens. As adults, especially as we get older, and again, depending on your upbringing and depending on the influences you had around you, this could happen sooner or later in your life and your development, is that we get to this point where we are so scared off of being in a position of losing, of failing, of coming up short, of not being correct, that we basically wall off anything where we could possibly fall into those categories. So what we do is only stick to the things that we know, only stick to the things that we can be right about, only stick to the things that we know we can do the correct way, And then we stop growing because we're only doing the things that we know we can do. And it doesn't mean that you can't be successful. If you only stick to the things that you know you can do and that you're good at, and those things help create your success and they help you make money and they put food on your table and they take care of your family, you can still be creating success while at the same time you are internally, you're emotionally, spiritually, you're stagnant. You could be successful and stagnant at the same time. People tend to think that stagnation means you're losing or that you're failing or you're not, creating victory for yourself in life. You could be doing those things while at the same time still being stagnant because you're not growing. You're not getting any better. You're not going anywhere different because you just keep doing the things that you already know you can do. So how often are you putting yourself in a position purposely, voluntarily, of being the beginner, of being the new person, of being the person who does not know how to stand up and walk just yet? How often are you doing that? When's the last time you did it? When's the next time you're going to do it? And what is something in your life that you know if you did go into it, you would be a beginner, but you've been putting off going into it because you having a conscious or an unconscious fear of being that beginner all over again? Purpose of this point is for me to really just help you jog your memory, because there is something. I guarantee you there is something, but you've just been putting it off. You've just been staying away from it because unconsciously subconsciously it's just been beaten out of you that you don't want to be wrong. You don't want to be failing. You don't want to be anything other than correct and right. But the thing is, that's slowing your growth. And in life, when you stop growing, you start dying. Point number 3. Today's topic again is how to be a beginner. Now, everything I'm saying here today so far does not mean that you never get into a situation or position of niching down into what you're going to do in life. It doesn't mean that you never focus. It doesn't mean that you don't aim to become really good at something that you can master and really maximize your potential at. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that you never just get on this thing and you're great at this thing and keep doing it. It doesn't mean you always got to try something new just for the sake of trying new things and kill off things that you're good at just for the sake of being a beginner, just so you can say you're a beginner. What you can do, however, is you can take elements from areas of life, different areas of life where you are a beginner, things that you are not great at, and apply those elements to things that you are great at, things where you are not a beginner, where you are a seasoned professional, where you really do know your stuff. If any of you have seen the poster image that I used to promote my newest book, The Third Day, The Decision That Separates the Pros from the Amateurs, it looks like something you might use for a movie, right? A promotion for a movie. Now, maybe that poster will work to help promote the book, and maybe it won't, but this is something I wanted to try out because I hadn't never done anything like that before. I made mock-ups for books before. Everybody's seen those before. But how many people have seen a poster the way that I had gotten that poster design? You look at something like the National Basketball Association over the last year, last season during the COVID pandemic shortened season, then it got resumed with the bubble. They tried something like the bubble. These players playing inside of this one area and all the games basically being inside the same arena. That was a new idea. They tried this new idea called the play-in tournament, which is basically taking the lowest seeded possible playoff teams, having them play against each other in order to earn the final 2 playoff spots. And they did it last season. They did it again in the current season that's being played out right now. Should be going towards the NBA Finals by the time you hear this episode. Now, some people have loved the new ideas with the play-in. Some people have not liked it. And there are even some players who have expressed some disappointment with the play-in situation, for lack of a better term. New things that work, we end up calling those innovations. When a new thing doesn't work, we call it a bad idea. But if you're not willing to have bad ideas, you can never have innovations. Innovations only come about when someone is willing to have a bad idea, a wrong idea, a failing idea, to try something that just does not work. So again, the question you're going to ask yourself on the heels of today's episode is, how often are you putting something out there that could possibly be a bad idea and at the same time could possibly be an innovation? You need both. You can't win without the possibility of losing. You can't have an innovation without the possibility of it being a bad idea. So let's recap today's class, which is how to remain a beginner in mind and spirit, also in body. Again, Tim Ferriss, hat tip to him for sharing an excerpt from George Leonard's book, Mastery, which actually planted the seed for today's masterclass. Point number 1, be willing to be wrong, imperfect, and a work in progress. New inventions and innovations only come from people who are willing to be wrong for long enough to bring about something new, Thomas Edison, they say 10,000 experiments in order to create the incandescent light bulb. That's a long time to be wrong about one thing. And what are you willing to be wrong about 10,000 times in order to get it right? Think of something like Formula 409, the all-purpose household cleaner. It's called Formula 409. I talked about this in my book, Work on Your Game, which you can get at workonyourgamebook.com. It's called Formula 409 because the scientists who created it tried 409 different combinations before they found the right one that is the cleaner that you can now buy in your local convenience store. Point number 2, when you do and try things that are new to you, you're usually not great at them at the beginning because you're a beginner. You're just starting. You should expect to be bad at it. If you're instantly good at something that you've never done before, that's probably luck. Now the question then is, how often are you putting yourself in that position to do something that you're brand new at and you know you're going to suck, and there's going to be other people who are way better than you, and you might be laughed at, you might even laugh at yourself because of how terrible you are. How often do you purposely place yourself in a position of being a beginner, or are you only doing things that you know you're good at? Thusly, even though you may be successful, you're no longer growing. You are putting yourself in a position of stagnation and you might not even notice it. And point number 3, this is not all to say that you shouldn't niche down, focus, and aim to become really good at certain things. If those things are paying off for you, you probably should focus on doing them. But the question is, or here's what you can do. Here's a suggestion. You can take elements from other areas of your life where you are a beginner and apply them to areas where you are not a beginner. So for example, I'm not new at writing books, but I try some different elements of marketing and promoting books every time I have a new book. Or I even take a book that is already out. I'll try some new elements of marketing and promoting them to get that book out. So the writing book part is not new to me, but how I'm going to promote it and how I'm going to get it into the hands of people I want to read it, I might try something new with that. The NBA, for example, is not new at basketball games, but they did try something new, which is the play-in tournament, single elimination tournaments to determine who's going to get the last 2 playoff spots. Maybe they'll keep it, maybe they won't. But without the possibility of it end up being a bad idea that ends up on the trash heap, you can never come up with an innovation. So this is the yin and the yang, the balance that you have to have. In order to put yourself in the possibility of winning, you got to give yourself the possibility of losing. To give yourself the possibility of an innovation and a new idea that everyone loves, you got to give yourself the possibility of a bad idea that everyone hates and you have to throw out. Now, this is what I mean when I say keeping yourself in the mindset and the spirit of being a beginner. Send me a text. Tell me the most valuable insight you got from today's masterclass. Is it something you're going to do or think differently based on what you heard today? Or maybe something you were thinking about a long time ago, you forgot about it, and now that I said it, you're thinking about it again now, and you will finally do something about it. My number is 305-384-6894. Work on your game. Dre all day.